What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news. And today, we're going to be diving into the two most recent signings by the Detroit Lions. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're back to do another little breakdown video. Now, this one's going to be a little bit smaller than the last couple, like Matthew Betts and Christian Mahogany. That's the goal for this video, to be a little bit smaller version of a breakdown, especially with the first player that we talk about, because he's been with the Lions for multiple seasons. We've done videos on him in the past. We know who the guy is, but it was really for me to do a quick little refresher, like, okay, let me refresh myself on some of his game film, and then we'll talk about the player. And we needed this, by the way. And then the second player we're going to talk about is a new addition. We'll spend a little bit more time there, as that is a player who is now reuniting with a former coach with the Detroit Lions. So with that, let's dive right into it. We have to start at the safety position first, which we all knew we needed to add depth to the safety position. Behind Ife Melifonwu and Kirby Joseph, really the only true safety you actually had was Brandon Joseph, the undrafted free agent out of Notre Dame. So you had a young player with the athletic tools, the size, but you needed some more depth back there. Now, you could also include Sione Vaki to the backup safety list if you want to. I think he's going to be a running back for the Lions. I think he's going to be special as a running back, but I did like things about him as a safety when we drafted him. When we initially drafted him, I thought that he was a safety because that's what I had watched him for, was safety. Thought he was very intelligent, so I think he could play that role in a pinch. You could do it. I think it's going to help him make the team this season and beyond, is that he has that kind of flexibility, but I also could have some questions about limitations in certain matchups for the player, and also there were real questions that I had as a run defender as well. However, as a running back, I think the dude's going to be special, but we don't need to dive into that. That'll be for a later video. We talked about that a few times over here and also on Bleacher Reports. We have the Detroit Lions announcing that they are signing CJ Moore. Now, CJ Moore has been with the Lions for multiple seasons now. He started here as an undrafted free agent, and he was with the Lions up until, of course, suspension this past season. He and a few other players like Quintez Cephas were involved in that, and now he is back with the Lions. And when we saw the list of players that were reinstated after that suspension for this upcoming season, like CJ Moore, Quintez Cephas, those were the two guys that stuck out. I was like, yo, I'd be cool with bringing either of those guys back, or both of those guys back. And of course, they did it with CJ Moore. And I've always been a CJ Moore fan. If you've been here for a while, I'm a pretty big CJ Moore fan, because I just really like the depth that he adds to your secondary. I just feel like he can play multiple roles for the Lions. He's shown success stepping down, playing the run. He's active in run support. He's also shown ability to get certain matchups and have success in man coverage. And then in kind of that free safety role, I think it's been at times kind of like a learning process. There isn't a ton of reps to even look at from that position, so there's hit and miss results. However, he has shown real ability and football intelligence from the back end, as well as being a very active communicator. This is just a guy that I'm a big fan of, and I'm very glad that they added him back. But to do a quick little background on who is CJ Moore, just for a quick refresher for everybody out there, we might as well do it. This is the safety that is now 28 years old, 5'11", 191, undrafted free agent back in 2019. That the last time we saw him was 2022, and he played 106 defensive snaps for the Lions, rotating in with injuries, Chicago, Green Bay, the Jets. We saw him in those games. Kind of similar thing in 2021 as well, where he played 158 defensive snaps, and then also he's been a key special teams piece for the Lions. For example, in 2022, he played on every special teams unit outside of field goal block, which just makes sense. He would really have no role there. He's played on every other special teams unit. He racked up in 2022 5 tackles with only 2 missed tackles, according to PFF, and also some really strong grades in there as well. Plus, he was our personal protector going back to 2022 on the punt team. Lions absolutely value that. Then when it comes to playing the safety position, and I kind of hate looking at the numbers here because it's such a small sample size, it's really not a lot to take away. But in 2021, 7 receptions on 10 targets, allowed the 39.6 pass rating, as he had the 1 interception that was against Green Bay when Jordan Love stepped in. So, you know, maybe he's got something there. But pass breakup in 2022 also came against Green Bay. So, again, maybe he just has Green Bay's number. Let's hope that's the case. That'd be amazing. Kirby seems to kind of have that a little bit. Numbers look good in terms of coverage for CJ Moore. Again, there's just not a lot of statistics to look at there. But some of the notes that I took down were kind of just refreshing myself on some of the film, and I'll go through some clips here. What I do like is that he has aggressive pursuit angles in run support. He's a very active in run support. He probably could have some issues getting off of blocks. I also don't think he's the most dynamic athlete. You'll see that in recovery speed and coverage specifically, or moving laterally, and again, getting off of blocks or getting on top of blocks in some of the wide zone spots. I think that can be inconsistent. He's very willing to stick his nose in. You see it as a blitzer. You see it as filling run gaps, even though, again, there could be some inconsistencies there. And Chicago, for example, there was a couple plays where we had some real breakdowns, and he seemed like he could have definitely been involved in those breakdowns that we had in the back end. So credit to Chicago for making that happen. But what you like about him in coverage, to me, is the way that he hits his landmarks consistently. He always seems to kind of be in the general area of where he's supposed to be. If the ball is thrown his direction, and depending on what zone he's playing, right, if he's playing a two-man look and he's just taking half the field, if he's playing quarters, quarters, he's playing a quarter coverage, like whatever he's playing defensively, if he's a single high safety, kind of in the radius of where the ball is or where he's supposed to be on the play. You just get that sense. Now, that doesn't always mean that he always finds routes. I think at times, dig routes underneath and get pulled by the quarterback. We saw that in multiple different games, but he typically ends up in the right spot, and I think that's because he hits his landmarks so consistently in coverage, and that also improves his range, where even if he's not the most dynamic athlete, he gets on top of plays, reads the quarterback body language pretty well. Now, that could be hit and miss results, but he gets on top of things, quarterback movement, rolls with it, and then he also has the transition ability. We talk about opening your hips, the transition there, some of the quickness in the lower body to transition, turn, and run. So he's been able to carry the range of a free safety, and again, he's also shown that flexibility to step down and play man coverage. Now, I think certain receiver matchups would be a little bit more of a problem. He has an aggressive mindset, but I also like how he seems to kind of tweak his mindset based on what the defense is doing. Like, hey, we're blitzing this play, let me get a little bit aggressive, and just kind of playing off of what everybody else is doing around him. You can see that football intelligence there, but he has shown real flexibility to take running backs out of the backfield, communicate pre-snap, take tight ends. Even though he's a little bit undersized, he can obviously stick with those guys a little bit better with some of the quickness and speed that he's able to match up usually much better with. Again, some receiver matchups probably wouldn't love those as a fan. I think he could show some real struggles there. Will showcase hit and miss angles, and he also will give too much space at times in like too deep coverage, for example, just allowing completions that, especially when the ball hangs in the air, like you want to see him close a little bit faster there. But also because he's constantly reading the quarterback's eyes and reading the movement, he does have a pretty good trigger when something happens or the pass is thrown and the quarterback decides to let it go. He has a pretty good trigger to making his way towards the football. So overall for me, CJ Moore, this was much needed depth. Very excited to see this. We know the special teams value is also there. I'm very happy to see CJ Moore back. I'm a fan of CJ Moore. I'm glad that he's here. You kind of know exactly what you're going to get, and know that if he has to step in for a few games, you're going to get a versatile piece. You may not get as much playmaking as you would love, but he's constantly around the football, and I think that stands a lot to just understanding where he's supposed to be on the field, right? He even just flashed some tracking ability as well, some speed there. So again, not the biggest athlete, but he's usually where he's supposed to be. Now, we could have some communication lapses, but usually we're supposed to be in terms of getting to his spots in coverage, and for that, I like that CJ Moore is back. All right, let's continue on, because here is the main signing that I wanted to discuss, and this is because he's a new Lion, right? We know about you, CJ Moore, but how about Kyle Peko from the Tennessee Titans, the defensive tackle or nose tackle, defensive tackle, either one you want to call it. He's played different roles from 2-eye, one technique, 4-eye. He's moved around the defensive front, who is signing with the Detroit Lions, the nearly 31-year-old interior defensive lineman. Now, there's an immediate connection here, and that's going to be our defensive line coach, Terrell Williams. But I think the other thing that's important to hit on here is that this offseason, we were going into it and looking at different free agent defensive tackles. If you guys remember, we did a ranking video on that. And one guy that I put on that list was Tier Tart. I believe I put him at the bottom of the list because my question was, hey, look, it makes sense schematically, and at that time we didn't have DJ Reader, to get that nose tackle in the building. What they do stylistically would fit our defense. It was just a question of the fact that he was cut towards the end of the season. There was effort, questions about the player. Really one of those things to me where it was mainly like, hey, we're going to find out. Obviously, if Williams feels good about the player and they sign him, we'll know that because Williams has a personal connection, so we'll be confident in that decision that they decide to make. Obviously, the Lions did not decide to do that, but instead now they're signing a teammate of his, and that's Kyle Peko, who unfortunately ended the season on IR dealing with a calf injury, but he was on that same defensive line. So you know schematically that it's going to make a ton of sense for the Lions. He's bounced around a little bit in the NFL, but he's had 2 stints with the Tennessee Titans, which would mean at 2 times he was with our defensive line coach. And to be honest with you, when kind of watching back some of the games from this past season on that Titans defensive line, one, I did not know that he was playing that much this past season. He played by far the most snaps that he's played. I believe he posted 358 defensive snaps this past season, which was by far the most that he's ever had in an NFL season. Like, it doubled up the next season that was even close to that. So that's the first thing I took away. The second thing was, while his grades may be hit and miss depending on what statistic or metric that you're looking at, there is some pass rush production, but also he's shown in certain games like really good flashes. Like, he's shown really good moments and things that you're like, wow, you can really build on this. And then you've seen the flip side where you're like, this does not look great. But one thing that you always take away, and it seems to always be the case anytime a guy signs with the Lions, is that you're going to see the effort. You're going to see the pursuit. You're going to see that energy. It's very visible. I have some clips that I think will showcase that pretty well. But the 6'1", 305 rotational defensive tackle for the Lions. Now, I'd say the other thing that's important to this, and this is kind of like a good preview because this is probably the next player that we're going to dive into, which is Mekhi Wingo, and Brad Holmes saying that they kind of like him a little bit more at that defensive end position. They told us this around the draft because, again, he's a little bit small for the interior defensive line, even though he did a lot of that with LSU. LSU, they like the reps that he played at defensive end, and they think that he could add some real value there. If that is the case, which it seems like it probably is, if that is the case and that's how they view Wingo, especially on early downs if he's on the field, that would make a ton of sense that the Lions would say, hey, we need some more interior defensive line depth. Drafted Wingo, I knew him as an interior defensive lineman. My big question was, like, can you put on a little bit of weight there? But the Lions are going to view him more as a typical defensive end on early downs. Adding a little bit more girth on the interior does make a lot of sense for the Lions, because outside of adding this player, you know, your depth will be guys like Levi and Broderick Martin. A little bit more in the interior, and also a guy that has a connection with our defensive line coach, and he's coming off of probably his best season, does make a lot of sense. Now, he also tests in pretty well. Really nice arm length, just under 33 inches with a 5'1", 340, 31 bench press reps, which stands out. You'll see some of that bench press power. I think that he needs to utilize his feet a little bit better to kind of maximize that power. The lower body could help him, but he does show upper body strength. The 7.30 flat 3 cone drill, 32.5-inch vertical, which really showed some of that explosiveness. And then when you start to kind of dive into the player a little bit, it was kind of all over the place for me, because I thought there was just a lot of inconsistencies in certain areas. But when I stepped back and I finally got done with the player, even first starting off with the first step, that burst off the line of scrimmage, this was an area that I thought was just inconsistent. And it mainly came back to me with just anticipation and handling blocking schemes, handling offensive linemen, being able to anticipate where they were coming from, because this was not an area where my initial reaction was, man, he's slow off the ball. I actually thought it was adequate get-off activeness, and then also he carries some explosiveness where when you watch him get downhill, you're like, that's not bad. And you could also see at times kind of that first step laterally, you're like, that's not bad. It's just inconsistent. For me, I thought he carried a legitimate upfield burst when you talk about kind of playing more in that nose stack role, the one technique or the 2-eye for this defense, playing inside of an offensive guard. I thought he showed better upfield burst in those spots, especially if they were asking to play a little more of one gap situationally, because he played a lot of different roles depending on who they were playing. But then he also showed the ability to get off the line pretty low within that first step, which helped him out, especially when he was getting downhill. But the wider it seemed that you would put him on the play, the less consistency you would have, especially if he was doing with like wide zone and things like that, trying to be able to maintain, keep the foot quickness laterally, be able to stay on top of the blocks without falling behind. Here was the biggest thing for me: inconsistent processing speed. I thought that slowed him down a ton, whether that was handling combo blocks, anticipating a down block, getting into his sets a lot quicker. The footwork wouldn't always be there. There was some hesitation. There was a little bit like, okay, do I want to get a field? Actually, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to kind of slant a little bit. And that was just inconsistent. It was hit and miss. And I thought that process speed is really what would pull back his first step. Now, I'll say this. The Baltimore Ravens game, which was the most impressive game that I watched him play, obviously he was going against Kevin Zeitler at times in that game, and he actually had some good reps against Kevin Zeitler, which I think is a real positive. But in that game, that was some of the best processing I saw him have this past season. I was like, man, he's playing quick. He's getting on top of blocks. The anticipation is there. He looks like a completely different player when his first step and processing speed is on point. This was probably the best rep that I saw. You're going to see locked inside hands. You're going to see him play with knee bend and not leaning over his skis here. Then you're also going to see the awareness there, the foot quickness, then to corkscrew down, handle the double team. That way he can open up the later shed. This was a beautiful example. With that being said, though, what he does well, and this is pretty consistent, and we've said it with our last player, Matthew Betts, but he really thrives in this category. Mekhi Wingo does this really well, too, so if you're just looking for similar traits, it's finding the football. He plays with excellent vision through blocks. Now, he also carries real flexibility as well. So when you talk about some of the testing numbers and the flexibility that he carries, he's got a lot of traits of a guy that should be pretty successful. He also carries usually natural leverage, being at 6'1" on the interior with good length. Like, he has a lot of the measurables and the traits and also the athleticism that you would think, like, this could really work if we can dial in that consistency. And you see some really awesome reps where at times I watched him like, how in the world is this guy available? And then the flip side, you're like, okay, it makes sense why he's available. But what you do get is that vision, and you'll see that awareness, slant rush off the line of scrimmage. You would even see the awareness at times there, the ability to kind of shorten his footwork. Like, I want to get upfield. I don't want to over slant on this play. Feeling offensive lineman kind of working downhill if it was a wide zone. Like, let me pause. Let me get myself upfield here. Now, let me not overrun in this spot. So that's where the processing speed could really show up and be a lot faster. And then you got to see some of the athletic gifts that he really did have. Processing speed was the biggest thing for me, because he would also be hit and miss at getting on down blocks first. He could lose the control immediately on the rep, and then again, it could throw off his lower body. He wouldn't get his footwork in a position. He wouldn't have his footwork under him. He'd lose strength. He'd lose any sort of drive power at the point of attack. So that was the first thing. As the first step to me, I gave him a below average to average grade, but it's all about the processing quickness. If that's there, he's a lot quicker off the line. Now, for me here as a pass rusher, I thought he was adequate here. All right, I thought it was sufficient. I didn't think it was plus. I didn't think it was below average, but I thought there was like enough here where you're just saying like, okay, can he give me like a spot pressure? Absolutely. Now, statistically speaking, he's done some of that. Like, for example, this past season, 7 pressures, 5 hurries, and then you look at the tackle side, 10 missed tackles, 15 tackles. 10 missed tackles is too much, and you can kind of see that in his game, and I think that sometimes that's being late to shed. But it's the big thing here, which is pass rush, and to me, it's just that he has enough juice in the tank to give you some flashes here and there. I don't think he's going to be a consistent dominant pass rusher, but what I like the most is that he showed variety. So even though he wasn't consistently winning as a pass rusher and he wasn't really utilized as a third down piece, we're talking about, can the guy give me some wins on early downs? And I would answer with yes. He's going to flash and give you some wins. Plus, he does a really nice job with second effort and pursuit. So typically, he's going to run you down on the play. Even on screens, he's going to run those things down. So he's going to find a way into it. But just being able to win as a pass rusher, thought it was a little bit closer to average, but that's okay. All right, that's actually good for the Lions because he's mainly playing on early downs here. And the big thing is this: he has a little bit of shake in his game, which I do like. He also had an ability to really roll his hips, and there's some of the flexion here. You saw the ability to roll his hips, open himself up, square himself to a block, create some drive, create some walk back in those spots as well. You saw that, for example, against the Colts. You see some hand usage and some variety there, like the club move, and then you'll also even see him try to attempt to create a little bit of slither as well. And his first step, especially as a pass rusher, when that's on point, again, he plays into that pretty well to showcase some of that shake that he has and some of the flexion and try to open up opportunities to attack as a defensive lineman. Now, where I thought he lacked is having a consistent bull rush, consistently creating walk back leverage, even just consistently creating an edge as a pass rush. Showcase some of that shake. I thought overall one of the biggest knocks for me for this player, and this was run and pass rush, but mainly more so against the run, was just body control. Too often he was on the ground, he was playing over his skis, he wasn't controlled on the play, and as a pass rusher, early pass rush rests would kind of die out. So I thought too often things became kind of more of a second effort win, but overall I think that's valuable for early downs. Talk about his ability to create an anchor and that play strength against the run. One thing that I like about this is that he does a consistent job of setting a wide base on contact, and one of the best things, sort of like a good offensive lineman or a center, right? Some of these guys that we talked about, while you may not get that initial jolt against the run or play behind the line of scrimmage consistently, I didn't think he did that nearly enough. He also wasn't dominant in gap and a half blocks where it's like, hey, block through the guard, push him into the other gap. Like, you didn't get much movement whatsoever. What you did get is the aspect that he was able to create an anchor. And again, a lot of that came back to flexion. It also came back to awareness of like, hey, let me get my base wide on the play. Let me settle myself down. And then with that flexion created as well, I can sink down and kind of lock out this rep eventually. And I can usually at least maintain my one gap. And he plays with that kind of gap integrity where even if he falls behind on the play, he knows where he has to get. So he's going to battle to get to that position. Now, with that being said, I didn't think he played with nearly the play strength that you would hope, and it wasn't nearly consistently there. Thought his pad level could get inconsistent by just being laid off the line. Where he does carry strength is he does carry strength in the core. I also talked about kind of the hips as well. He carries some core strength as well, and you'll see that when he's trying to kind of anchor himself down. He also has an ability to create upfield knockback, and you'll see that when his positioning is on point. Like, for example, here against Baltimore, when he just attacks off the line, positions himself well, and he gets drive back multiple yards behind the line of scrimmage. Now he's blowing up play. Like, in the NFL, you're not going to win on, man, he's a better athlete than that offensive lineman. Not usually. So for him, he's not winning that way. And that's where that consistency technically needs to be there, because you'll get flash wins, you'll get flash power, but for the most part, it's just not consistently there. And I think multiple things hurt him in certain spots here, not being able to create that force, whether that was slow process off the line, hands getting high, the issue of kind of creating forward lean to try to create movement rather than actually creating knee bend and really sinking down and forward. I love it when he's explosive and that first step is in the chest of an offensive lineman, but too often these hands are getting high and he's sliding off and he can't hold ground. See that also with the pad level as well. Now that moves me on to the hand usage, and hand usage I thought was actually a plus within his game. He constantly played with inside hands, locked in elbows, and he was able to create a pretty consistent inside hand first initial punch. You'd see it a lot of times against the run, but also as a pass rusher as well. And he does have some real upper body strength, and you'll see that in some of his punches. You'll see some of that bench press strengths. You'll see some of the strong hands as a pass rusher. We saw a little bit of that against Indianapolis, for example. The issues here is that there is not consistently knockback on contact for that hand usage. I don't think he consistently creates torque into contact. He also has problems settling into wide zone blocks, and one of the biggest issues I had for this player was I didn't think his footwork and his hands were consistently in sync. Like, they felt like they were kind of doing their own thing, where his hands would try to go one place and his feet weren't in a position to actually create any anchor or force behind it, or it'd be the flip side where his feet are kind of into it and his hands weren't there, and it just kind of did not feel like his hands and feet were consistently in sync. And then again, technically you'd lose a lot of that kind of that pop that you would want to see in initial contact. That was a pass rusher. He could have some late hands. You'd see that on kind of the hand swipes in pass rush, but he definitely had a variety of moves, and he had some capabilities to kind of sync together some pass rush moves with his footwork. It was a little bit less consistent against the run. I thought it was much much more consistent as a pass rusher. But again, I think for him, it's just anticipation. Like when he was able to anticipate, okay, run block scheme is going like this is the guy that I have to pick up. And when he sped that process up, all of these things I think improved. Because his ability to shed to me right now is definitely below average. And that was, he didn't carry the footwork to create gap and half opportunities. He wasn't carrying that kind of strength or that kind of leverage to be able to create, power and sustain it throughout the rep. Maybe the initial contact was there, but he couldn't sustain it. So it was more so just kind of falling back onto his anchor. Wasn't getting squared into guards to deal with combo blocks outside zone. It was very consistent. There was some rests where he was just falling on the ground completely. I also thought at times his knee bend was not consistent here either, where he was just kind of splitting his base, but he wasn't playing with the knee bend or sinking himself down. Instead, he was just kind of getting wide on the play and kind of just waist bending or kind of just leaning forward to create push. Instead of creating lower leg drive, he was just kind of creating push with his upper body, and then he wouldn't contain, and then it would really throw off his body control as well. Inconsistent base, which would set too wide on the play, he'd kind of lose power. Now, what he does have is he has the hand usage that can, again, typically keep his elbows inside, and he can create some pop on that initial contact a little bit. I don't think his hands are necessarily slow. I think they're sufficient in terms of the quickness for his hands to get into that contact. He just needs to speed everything else up, but he also does carry the length, and where he really thrives, his real ability for me to be able to, create shed and create opportunities late on the play, which is what we're going to talk about next, is the agility that he carries in the lower body. Now, before we get there, he also has an ability to find success against zone blockers as well when he's able to kind of get upfield on offensive line, and he's able to kind of lean into just some of that athleticism and play fast. When he plays fast, he's a different player. That being said, though, the agility that he carried in the lower body was kind of the, okay, this is pretty nice. I thought he had plus agility within his game, and it created opportunity for him to get in positions where late in the play he could work back over blocks, survive in awkward positions. That kind of tied along with the flexion that he carried as well. Now, where he did lack a little bit was kind of lateral quickness, and I thought not only could his pad level rise here, but I really did question if he was able to create lateral movement while also keeping some sort of bend without just becoming straight up. I think that's something that's important to kind of maintain that lower pad level. I think that's something they were working on with Broderick Martin this past season. That being said, though, usually it's a little bit better because it's more natural, and an offensive lineman trying to get lateral, especially on kind of the wide zone blocks, usually he was in an okay spot because they were playing a little bit higher too. But the flip side of this is his body control was kind of a mess, and this is where I actually ended up with my lowest grade here, kind of pushing a poor level here, because he was way too often just on the ground. I mean, that just happened way too often. Again, finding balance into blocks, dealing with offensive line movement, lateral footwork. Again, I talked about some of the quickness lacking there a little bit. Holding his ground, you saw that against Pittsburgh and some of the double teams. He was a little bit unbalanced when he was trying to get upfield. Body control was kind of the biggest issue that I had. Going back to some of the strengths here to kind of wrap it up, he carries real flexion in his game, and this is in a lot of different areas. I think he carries knee flexion. You'll kind of see it within his first step, the ability to kind of torque his lower body to create kind of that first step directionally, like I want to get lateral, I want to get upfield on the play. That he does a little bit too much waist bending, where again, he's just kind of splitting his legs and he's getting wide, he's not sinking himself down. That would probably be the biggest issue of flexion, but he also carries ankle flexibility as well. He has lower back bend, which we saw a really good rep of, where it's like he's able to kind of just find balance in awkward positions. He's shown ability to reset kind of that lower body, dealing through contact, and then again, settling down kind of that anchor. He also has the second effort hips for late wins. To me, there's real flexibility, which can add a lot of upside to his game. And then he's also a legitimate closer. Now, the big issue here will be consistently finishing. All right, shows ability to close and effort, right? Closing to the football, you see the energy there. You see the finishing upside, sideline to sideline. And there's also a burst within his game to tackle. So when he kind of finds the running back, he has like a closing burst, like a single step that he could take that really closes ground pretty quickly. He's just inconsistent at finishing. Two things here. One, it kind of seems like he just puts his head down on tackle attempts. And number two, keep an eye on that flexibility showing up as a pass rusher. It seems like there's even more upside with the variety that he has now. I would not be shocked if he was able to break out a nice little spin count. He had a little bit more body control and he wasn't constantly falling over. He'd probably improve his tackle rate and kind of efficiency there. You'll also see it though on screens. You see some of the redirect, deflection, the agility. You'll see the redirect get upfield, redirect with the screen, race into the play. You even see him do some coverage drops. Like he has the foot ability there. And then from a football intelligence spot, while we talk about kind of speeding up the process, I love the vision that he plays with. He constantly seems to know where the football is. Some of the best interior defensive linemen that I liked this offseason, whether it was Grovert Stewart, who's coming to mind, for example, like those guys play with real vision to find a ball carrier. This is a player that I think brings that to the table as well. Similarly to the guy that we just talked about, Matthew Betts, very similarly to a guy like Mekhi Wingo, he shows kind of that vision. He plays with eyes up on the front side of blocks, so he's always searching and trying to find it. He plays with that gap integrity, He just has to improve his anticipation as dealing with offensive line schemes. Overall, this is a player that I think is going to have to battle to make the team. I don't think it's for sure that he's going to make the team. I thought it was a lot more flash than consistency, but that being said, the flashes are extremely promising. And the fact that where he started to kind of seemingly pull it together was with his defensive line coach getting by far his most snaps. Obviously, Williams bought into probably the player, just the effort that he plays with, but also understanding that like the guy carries a lot of traits that you would want, and he's shown real games where he's looked really good against really good competition. It wasn't like he was going against Ravens like, oh, he's going against some who are those guys? Like, no, he's playing really well against the Ravens. Then you flip it around, you find other games where it's like, that's not great, like Pittsburgh. Like, this looks pretty awful. Like, every rep does not look good here. So there's that. It's just a lot of kind of up and down, up and down. He's shown scheme flexibility. I think that he's probably better, kind of more so in that nose stack role, kind of playing more closer to the 2-eye. But he's shown flexibility to go to a 4-eye spot. When he's into 4-eye, he usually can get a little bit more aggressive upfield, and he plays faster, which I do like. So honestly, getting wider might allow him to play a little bit faster. I thought he was inconsistent, though, just dealing with combo blocks. 2-eye or 3 technique, just inconsistent.
And I think he can fit into multiple gap schemes. One gap, his first step upfield when it's aggressive, he plays fast, he's a much better player. He has 2 gap ability with his length, but also the anchor and flexion that he creates. Didn't love gap and a half as much because I didn't think he was creating kind of the knockback that was necessary, but I love the idea of him in like these 3 technique looks, right? Backing up a guy like Aleem, competing with Levi, giving pass rush upside, but also playing that attack and react style where he can be aggressive, get that first step, speed up your process, let's play faster, and we'll lock out and go from there. We just need to speed up your process overall.
So, I think the Lions are going to have real flexibility here. If at times they want to say, hey, DJ Reader, you play nose, all right, and then we're going to put on a 4-eye, this guy could rotate into those looks for the Lions if they wanted to do that. And we saw teams like Cincinnati do that this past season, play some of those 4-eye, 0-4-eye fronts. He could fit into that. He brings that kind of flexibility to this Lions defense, but I think specifically his interior defensive line ability, playing the run, and giving you a little bit of upside as a pass rusher, that makes a ton of sense if the Lions are looking to put Wingo at defensive end. Plus, when they ultimately lost this player due to IR and the injury, they went out and signed Quinton Bohanna, who was the nose tackle that was with the Lions. So I think we can kind of put these together. That might give you a vision of what the Lions are viewing for this player to add value, how this player is going to add value. So with that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.